Crystal Chronicles 1 performed pretty well. Did it hit numbered FF sales numbers? Nah. But for the first Square game on a Nintendo console with a low install base that also required a shit ton of periphery equipment to play it, not that bad. Now, even back during the first title's development, they planned to expand the world, a plan that, not flopping, helped to manifest. Of the remaining 5 games, all of them released really close together in North America. Ring of Fates and My Life as a King in 2008, then Echoes of Time, My Life as a Dark Lord, and Crystal Bearers all in 2009. For the sake of discussion, I'm gonna go ever so slightly out of order here. Echoes of Time is a direct follow-up to Ring of Fates with the same gameplay besides some refinements, while My Life as a Dark Lord is a direct follow-up to My Life as a King, so it makes sense to talk about their follow-ups after each other. If you're watching the version of this in parts, those 4 are today. Before jumping in, I want to talk a little bit about the development of all 4. First off, the team from the original game split up their individual focuses. Most of the key staff members from the first title stayed with Crystal Chronicles in some form, with the main notable exception being Kazuhiko Aoki, the original's director, who had no direct involvement with the series going forward. At the very least, his work on the original set the stage for these next 5, so I don't want to totally downplay his importance. Which, since all 5 of the following projects were developed close together, Akitoshi Kawazu stepped back a tiny bit. He still had a major hand in overseeing all of Crystal Chronicles, but he was executive producer or supervisor on most of them, as well as a lot of the Ivalice games. He only directly produced Crystal Bears, while the other 4 had producers that didn't work on the original. For Ring of Fate specifically, that went into the planning stages pretty much as soon as Nintendo released the DS. The Crystal Chronicles team saw how they could improve the format by giving everyone both their own personal game screen on top of, literally, their menu screen, thanks to the hardware, leading to Mitsuru Kamiyama, the lead programmer of Crystal Chronicles 1, to become director, lead programmer, and one of the writers for both DS games. Then Toshiyuki Itahana, while still providing art for Ring of Fates, focused his attention on directing Crystal Bears. My Life as a King also likely started around the same time, but besides music and art, that team shares shockingly little staff with the original, and it had a very short dev cycle. Anyways, a little before E3 2006, Square Enix announced a DS and Wii Crystal Chronicles, with Ring of Fates manifesting on DS in 2007 in Japan. It and the other 3 we're talking about today had fairly short press cycles. Nothing really noteworthy, so we're gonna go pretty quick. However, before going to Ring of Fates, I want y'all to think about the Final Fantasy public image at the time, because I think it gives us a good context for what's here. Mainly, from Final Fantasy VII's release through to Final Fantasy XII, the public saw Final Fantasy as a platinum-level, unshakably top-tier series. By having the Final Fantasy name on your cover, you promised a top-tier game. Not a single other RPG came close to this status in English-speaking territories. With that said, after 10's release, a few small, I think I'll say expectations, caused the public perception of the series to not exactly drop, but parts of the fanbase had issues with certain releases. Like with 10-2, 11, and 12. All 3 are in the highest tier of gaming. In terms of technical prowess, storytelling, and gameplay, giving any of these less than a B during their time of release is questionable. But these 3 also differ from each other drastically. If we had the exact same person reviewing all 3 with all of their biases intact, it's unlikely that they'd put them on the same tier. It had fans asking, what is Final Fantasy, and what do we want from Final Fantasy? These 3 mainline games, as well as high-quality spin-offs like Crystal Chronicles, next to questionable ones like Dirge of Cerberus, didn't bring the FF brand down. It still solidly maintained that platinum status, but it's around here when casual players would skip a game or 2. Less due to quality and more due to the higher volume of spin-offs that strayed from the core series style. Plus, I can't stress this enough, the mess that was Fabula Nova Crystallis' development. I'm not going into that today because it's way too much for a background element to this video, but it did not help. Not to mention, after 13 and 14 came out, that was the first time when Final Fantasy showed fault to a major scale in the games department. Especially with 14. Square will likely never have a flop as bad and to the scale of 14. However, that all happened after Crystal Chronicles ended, so we can put it all away. It's just a background element to keep in mind. Ones I feel super worthy to mention because the rest of the Crystal Chronicles games didn't receive the highest praise on release, or much in retrospect. I'm not gonna pretend like they're all hidden gems that everyone needs to play, but even in discussion about Final Fantasy in retrospect, it seems like today's 4 specifically go under the radar. With the WiiWare Duo, I'm sure the release format played a part. Not many people open up to the idea of Wii points or digital games yet, meaning few people bought them, leading to few people with memories of them. But why do I hear so little about the DS games? They're both of pretty high quality for the system. 3D graphics, moderate voice acting, stealth FMV sequences resulting in my upscaler fucking up, rare stuff for a DS game to get right. Well, I have my own theory. If you had me in the background, you should look on screen. This right here is every Square Enix game released on DS in North America. You may notice, your screen is currently filled with some of the highest quality games put to a handheld. I'd consider Ring of Fates a super good handheld game, and Echoes of Time is certainly well above average, but they're going up against literal greats. Like, this isn't even the entire system. This is just Square Enix's output. When there's this many great options, something is gonna get lost in the shuffle, and these two kinda did, which is a shame. I think Ring of Fates stands up on its own 2 legs without Crystal Chronicles 1, and Echoes of Time is a very solid dungeon crawler with discussion of it muddied by one kinda perplexing choice. So like I said, by the time of 2007, at least 3 Crystal Chronicles games were in development. In this video, we'll start with Mitsudo Kamiyama's team, who at the time worked on Ring of Fates, and given the only 17 months between releases and their sharing of everything, seem to have immediately gotten to work on Echoes of Time right after they finished Ring of Fates. I'm gonna stress I can't say for certain that's the case, but it's a pretty likely scenario. Echoes of Time has almost no pre-release information I can find today, and the most common statements I saw on old GameFAQs threads were, "What do we even know about this?" Even going back to my own recollections, I don't remember many trailers or articles. It just showed up at Game Crazy for $15, and seeing that title of Final Fantasy made me buy it. However, I'm not too curious about the development. Given how almost every staff member has the same role between the two, while the 2 games have an almost identical structure and combat, there likely wasn't much to say about Echoes of Time development cycle. Since the 2 share so much in common, I'm gonna very unnaturally split the chapters up. I'll talk about every story and world related thing for Ring of Fates, then all of that for Echoes of Time, then the gameplay of both. Echoes of Time is so similar that they probably would have released it as a Ring of Fates dungeon pack today, meaning if it had a separate gameplay segment, we'd have a 2-minute list of quality of life changes. Ring of Fates has 2 modes, the single-player story campaign and the multiplayer mode. Since a common criticism of the original, one I kinda share, is that the single-player fell short of the fun in multiplayer, they wanted to make sure Ring of Fates had the option for both. You can start with either, as with the exception of new flavor text in multiplayer after beating single-player, neither mode affects the other, almost like they're alternate universes. Something I want to make clear now, because this next, I'm guessing half hour, is just about the single player mode. Multiplayer doesn't have much of a story, while single player does. A story that actually doesn't take place following the original Crystal Chronicles. Instead, Ring of Fates occurs before it. Not before your journey, not before the miasma, but way long before in the Golden Age referred to in the Rabbena Terah intro narration. A very neat way of using the original's lore. Because of this, all the tribes are at peace. No lilty imperial conquest, the Selkies never faced persecution, Yuks are properly integrated into society, and Clavats, well, they're still the same. Unchanging like Bon Jovi's music over the years. In terms of the story's format, single-player mode takes a traditional approach. You have a cast written by writers instead of custom characters with a normal linear story, rather than the at-your-own-pace narrative of the original. As a kid, I felt disappointed since Crystal Chronicles 1 presented a unique feel with everything I mentioned earlier, but I don't think it's worth harping on. Ring of Fates has a likable cast, and you still get a multiplayer mode with custom characters, so if you want the individuality element, you can still get it. So in single-player, our main characters are Yuri, a male Clavat who you play as, and his twin sister Chelinka, who you don't play as since Woke Enix didn't open for 2 more years. Yuri is a hot-blooded, shonen brain protagonist that throws caution to the wind for adventure, while Chelinka is a serious type with a crystal, some magical affinity, and a lot of worry for her brother. The twins live out in the countryside with their strong father Leitov and his 2 longtime friends, a female lilty named Meath, and Alhanalem the Yuk. Everyone calls him Al, and so will I. When we begin, the twins are only 9 years old. And I'll get this out of the way now, since it's not an aspect the story hides, there's a time skip in here. Yuri and Chelinka appear older on the box art and in the intro CG, so you already know something's gonna fling us to the future. Because of that, this entire first act is spent with Yuri and Chelinka as young children, a time for their childlike innocence to shine through. Perhaps comparable to the caravanners first seeing the outside world. Right now we get a feel for their happy relationship with each other, Meath, Al, and their responsible father, who when we begin, is teaching his 9-year-old kids how to use a sharp-ass, heavy-ass hatchet. Truly the father of the year. Once they figure it out, the two of them decide to play around with it in the caves unsupervised. It's a standard tutorial dungeon guided by the Moogles. Oh hey, these guys! I'll talk about them now while Ring of Fate's story hasn't picked up yet. If you've ever played a Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy besides 4, you know who the Moogles are. Funny, small, bear-type creatures with a red pom-pom on top of their heads. They've played a supporting or even major role in almost every iteration of Final Fantasy. Crystal Chronicles, throughout all of them, is one of the iterations where Moogles play a big role, mostly by expositing tutorials, which is a cool use for them in my opinion. They did that a few times in the numbered games, but here I think it has more meaning behind it. They're the most recognizable Final Fantasy creature in Crystal Chronicles, so them tutoring you feels like a cool pass. A mainline FF icon is teaching you how to move from the turn-based number games to their action-oriented spin-offs. And in the case of Ring of Fates, they place down every signpost that gives you hints, a hard job they took upon with the leadership of Latov's friend Stiltskin to help Yuri and Chelinka. Now I think I mentioned this in passing last time, Stiltskin, you know, from FF9, is the only character to appear in each entry. And I don't mean a version of Stiltskin, I mean the same dude every time, as he and the rest of the Moogles are immortal, or at least live for many thousands of years. Stiltskin even had his own little journey in Crystal Chronicles 1 where he tried to figure out why Moogles lived so long and survived in the miasma, eventually deciding that maybe Moogles are a little bit related to the Carbuncles. Anyways, the main point of talking about them is this. Crystal Chronicles Moogle design is an easy top 5. I love the more fairy looking Moogle designs like here and 16. Anyways, while I talked about Moogles, Yuri and Chelinka found something spooky looking at the end of the cave. A big fucking scorpion. For Yuri, this ain't no problem. He sees a big-ass red crystal sticking out of his tail, and as a huge Zelda fan, he deduces that's his weak point. Then upon beating it, they see a ghost girl, run away in fear, and the rest of the first act continue with fun young child stuff. Extra emphasis on the fun word there, since Ring of Fates gets dark in the second and third acts. If you look under the hood, you do see some darker themes in this first half, for example, the ghost girl that just scared them off. However, for right now, the story is trying to share the sense of wonder Yuri and Chelinka have towards the world. Their wonderment of Stiltskin visiting their villa, Al making a little necklace for Chelinka to hold her magic crystal in, and even just witnessing their father's unwavering will in opening stuck doors amazes them. They're in the middle of a happy moment in their life, and on the day after they got their hatchet, Latov takes them to the big city with him for errands. A huge deal because they've never gotten to visit the big bustling city of Rabenna-Terra before. Right here in town is one of my favorite parts of the game. In fact, it's probably my favorite town in the sub-series as a whole. To take a horribly disheveled dungeon from Crystal Chronicles and turn it into this fancy town with a big crystal, a leader everyone loves, and citizens of every tribe is such a good choice. It sets in how much shit got fucked between the Golden Age and Crystal Chronicles 1. Not only because of the architectural changes, but due to the people we meet here as well. So this goes for Ring of Fates and Echoes of Time. They both have two towns, a sorta starter village and one main city, Rabenna-Terra for Ring of Fates, and Unnamed Fantasy City number 47 for Echoes of Time, both with their own sets of NPCs, though most character models from Fates appear in Echoes of Time somewhere in a Majora's Mask reuse asset style. At this point, when you first arrive, you get to talk to everyone to see what they have going on, and every time you finish a new dungeon, the townsfolk have new things to say. In Ring of Fates, it's typically in relation to the current events. For example, there's some heavy rain problems in the middle of the story, so all the townsfolk have some comments to make on it. A few worry about the town flooding, some think there's a bigger issue at play, and others use the chance to throw their small friends in the water. There's also going to be a plot point about people in the military fearing crystals, so the lilty that sold Magicite has to act as inconspicuous as possible when her only client, meaning you, comes by to purchase it. At this time, every villager gives the town a very lively feeling, making it even more tragic when we remember that this town eventually eventually falls to ruin. Not today though, it's still the fun, childlike wonder act for 2 more dungeons. One where the twins have yet more unsupervised fun in the monster-infested slums, and another where they visit the icy mountain Val with Al to find some plants. So at least they're supervised on the 3rd one. They're neat dungeons with some pretty cool story implications. For example, the slums give us that first hint that not everything is perfect. You may be a little kid with wonderment for the world, but there's still some stuff you're not old enough to understand. And it shows how Rabenete Ra, as wonderful as it seems from the outside, or as wonderful as people say it is thousands of years from now, still had its own problems. It's yet again a great way to give the player some things to theorize on. But for now, it's time to put an early close on Yuri and Chelinka's childhood.
Hello? It's cold. Close the door. Yeah. Is someone there? Me? Al?
It's here when the main plot kicks in. Ring of Fates goes from a childlike wonderment journey to a dark story of survival and revenge. In between the previous dungeons, we'd seen short scenes of 2 men. Galdice, the Hierophant of Crystal Temple in Rabenete Ra, and Ku Chaspel, his second in command. A horrible name to read for a guy who just started studying Vietnamese. On the night after taking out the mountains, Chaspel attacks Latov and his family with the plan to kidnap Chelinka for some reason. It has something to do with their missing mother, but then a fight breaks out before everything becomes clear. Which, man, it fucking breaks out. Latov punches the hell out of Chaspel, Chaspel fucking stabs Latov in the back, and then he still gets back up. Even after getting stabbed, Latov still protects his kids. However, he still goes out, leaving little kids to figure out what to do about the evil man. Chelinka, in a last-ditch effort, taps into the power of the crystals to ward off Ku Chaspel, saving their villa, striking enough fear in the church to not attack anymore, and turning Chelinka into a husk of her former self. Can't speak, walk, or do anything now, leaving Yuri to do what a 9-year-old should never need to: bury his father by himself. It's also during this fight when the church kidnapped Meath and Al, his only other support, so he has to care for his now vegetative sister alone, hoping that someday she'll get better. A vague number of years pass, or just 3 according to the strategy guide. Yuri has spent that time caring for his sister and training to become a warrior. He's been unable to save Meath and Al, learn the truth of his parents' fate, discover why Chelinka has this power, or prevent Chaspel from causing more harm out of fear for his sister's safety. So all he could do is train. But those were tasks he's gladly forgone in hopes of seeing his sister wake up.
Yuri.
And hey, look! Chelinka woke up, and she can only speak telepathically for now, which doesn't change much of the game because only important scenes have voice acting. With her awakened, Yuri can finally tackle the tasks he's put off, because if Chelinka's with him, they can share the load, face the adult responsibilities flung onto an average 12-year-old adult. Our setup presents an interesting difference from Crystal Chronicles 1. There, you just had to keep your village safe, a task your caravan performed routinely year by year after volunteering for it. Your caravan knew the gist of their job by year 4. They could rush, go slow, eventually they'd get it done. You didn't feel as though your fate was to save the town, and especially not stop the miasma. Caravanning didn't define them, it's just what they did. Before, during, and after the journey, no one even knew about the adventures of your caravan. You crystalled in your chronicle for only you and your friends to remember, with maybe someone in your village reading the tale later on. While here in Ring of Fates, the characters themselves have a grander purpose made clear at the start. Yuri needs to save his sister and surrogate family while stopping the church. You could call it his fate. During Ring of Fate's middle third, we get a feel for how the world has changed. Yuri and Chelinka haven't left their home in a few years, only to find that everything's kinda gone to shit. In that time, Galdice and Chaspel increase their political persuasion over the kingdom, so they send other members of the church around town to confiscate crystals from the townsfolk. Something they can do by using a pretty flimsy excuse relating to something Al told us about earlier. So remember the red weak points on bosses? Those are actually mutated crystals. Crystals with an unnatural negative energy caused by a group named the Lunites. To prevent that, Galdice told everyone to fear crystals. Now everyone even wants the big crystal in the middle of town removed, something we don't want since we use crystals to save our game. Due to the chapel's intervention, we can't get an audience with the king to warn him of the incoming threat, which becomes our new main goal in the second act. So during the process of proving ourselves worthy of said audience, we get a full party going with Meath, Al, and a Selkie from the woods named Nash. Characters you switch between in single player mode using the touchscreen, giving you a simulation of multiplayer and a feel for every tribe, which shows that it's kinda clear that's the entire point of single player mode. Let you get the feel of the 4 tribes and give a context for each dungeon before you switch to multiplayer, which I'm kinda fine with as it enriches the world by keeping up with the original's ethos of stuffing pounds of lore into the dungeons. For an example, let's use Nash. He joins you in the second post-timeskip dungeon, Abyssus Forest, an area recently inflicted with poisonous fumes. Nash grew up here in the forest pre-poison, and as such, helps the party find the boss fight to stop the poison. Then, after returning to Rabenna Terra, a random NPC mentions how years ago he visited a village in the forest. A village that, one day, suffered a plague that wiped out everyone, helping us figure out why exactly Nash is there. And here you might think, oh, why does that need an explanation? Selkies are always on the trail. Of course there's one in the forest on his own. Well, in the Golden Age, that's not entirely true. So this next little bit is partially based on headcanon, so don't blast us on forums, but it is all based on in-game lore between the 3 dungeon crawlers. Long before Crystal Chronicles 1, Selkies left their unnamed ancestral home and then suffered persecution, telling us they definitely had their individualistic attitude by the Miasma Age. However, during this golden era, there's not much to support that they currently act that way. With the exception of Nash, every Selkie we see lives in Rabenna Terra, dresses with less furs than any story later in the timeline. One Selkie woman describes her tribe as athletic, sexy nature lovers, and I don't recall any mentions of petty delinquency or thievery in Ring of Fates. Besides this one kid in town, but his lilty friend joins him, so we can write that off as kid stuff. Even going further than that, the current king of Rabenna Terra is a full-blooded Selkie, and the dungeon in Crystal Chronicles 1 that tells us about the Selkie's plight for a new home, Conal Curich, is right next to Rabenna Terra. Nothing in the narration of Conal Curich, or any of the other text in that stage, mentions the other tribes or miasma, just monsters and a lack of usable land. So what I'm kinda headcanoning, feel free to disagree, is that the Selkies considered Rabenna Terra their ancestral home. Rabenna Terra fell between Ring of Fates and Echoes of Time for a reason I'll get to in Echoes of Time, and that's when the Selkies began their search for new land. Supported by them having their furs and rackets again in Echoes of Time, while in Ring of Fates they only have bows, showing that after Ring of Fates they started working towards their depiction in the original game. Only flaw in this theory is that Selkies still live in the main town of Echoes of Time with no one acting differently towards them. Maybe a few years as nomads gave them the tendency for thievery, and then they moved to the Echoes of Time city, and that's when the tribe started to like them less? I don't know. If I stress this much about video game headcanons, I'm never finishing a video. Anyways, I was talking about dungeon lore. So far we deduced that there was a village in the forest, Nash is from there, he probably speaks Beaver now. That's the point I was probably getting to. After saving Al at the same mountain you explored with him before, getting rid of the poison in the forest, and accidentally adopting a forest teen older than you, the gang gets their first audience with King Kolka. At which point Al seems confident about how things will go because unbeknownst to Yuri and Chelinka, he, Meath, and their parents all worked for the castle before they were born. However, once they get in, it turns out that some Yuke chick is impersonating Al. Not very well though. She's not even the same gender, and some of the knights just admit they're kinda racist. King Kolka has no motivation to deal with any of this, or really the church at all. As we learned from NPCs earlier, he fell into a deep depression after his daughter died, which occurred after his wife died. Holy fuck, man, sorry for you, dude.
Roman, you're American.
Oh shit, right. No sympathy for any monarchy in my house. Since talking doesn't work, the gang heads to Reliciel, a dam-like structure suffering from leaks, leading to slight floods in Rabenna Terra that could worsen. And the reason for that is because at the center lies a big crystal that runs the place, and roughly 15 years ago, it stopped functioning. Meaning today, the entire place is roughed up, complete with closed-off paths and monsters. By the way, for anyone wondering why monsters exist without miasma, they kinda gloss over that. A Yuke in one of the games, I don't remember who or where, said something like, perhaps the definition of monster changes over time. We refer to what we don't understand as monsters. Which, honestly, I'll take that as an answer. Not a perfect explanation, but it sidesteps the Kingdom Hearts issue of making up other enemies because they can't use Heartless. Submit! Anyways, after reuniting with Meath and beating a boss who's fucking brutal when you don't have proper touch controls, the whole place collapses.
No! I won't let it end here! No!
from here on, the story focuses on explaining the history of the crystals in the universe, because, you know, that's still in the title. So the ghost we saw a few times, that's actually Princess Talika, King Kolka's deceased daughter. She possessed powers similar to Chalinka, the ability to control high-level magic through crystals. Not small stuff like casting Faraga, big shit, like changing the flow of time. Which is what happened when she and Yuri stopped the falling debris earlier. This is because Talika and the twins come from bloodlines with close ties to the crystals, Urbenete Ra royalty having mystic powers for as long as they can trace, and the twins' mother, Lady Illyria, being the Star Singer, an oracle that predicted the future for the royalty. Additionally, according to the FF Wiki, Lady Illyria's sister mothered Talika and married the king, but I have scoured my footage, the script on GameFAQs, and videos online to not find anything mentioning that. I can only assume that info is hidden in multiplayer mode, or maybe the Japanese guidebook? If anyone has a first-hand source, let me know in the comments. A few years before our protagonist's birth, Talika died during the same incident that broke the dam. An incident that Al believes a Lunite did. With that information, we meet back with the king, receive some of his blessing, and Kuchaspel stabs him and frames the gang. Because to no one's shock, he and the Hierophant are actually Lunites, trying to reshape the world in their own image. Due to the framing, our party ends up on Kilandra Island, a giant volcano island the royalty sends their prisoners to. And it's a dungeon back in the first game. Not that I've talked about it, but I think it's cool. Zooming forward, 2 dungeons pass and we come face to face with a carbuncle and Sir Latov's spirit, corrupted by an evil energy resource. To save his spirit, we need to travel back in time through memories to, like, beat up his traumas or something. It's not explained very well, just roll with it. Through the powers of Carbuncle, we're back to when the dam broke. We see Meath, Latov, Illyria, and Al in the past trying to save everyone. Where we learn, to no surprise, Kuchaspel corrupted the crystal, destroyed the dam, and led to Kalika's death as she needed to use her powers to save Latov and Illyria. And then the party just sticks around and watches Latov's memories a little longer. Hopefully not the whole thing literally, that seems like a poor use of their time. Now, there is one actually important lesson this gives to our heroes. It shows them the hardships their father withstood and learn that their mom isn't actually entirely dead, just kidnapped and placed into a crimson crystal 12 years ago by Kuchaspel. Being dead would have sucked less. Thanks to all the time travel, the party puts Latov's heart at ease, not because of what he remembered in the past, but for what his children have become today, letting his children know he's proud of them. And afterwards, using the power of being Carbuncle, our green boy teleports them to a cave underneath the Urbenete Ra castle, a basement which houses the Great Crystal, which in this era requires lots of space. And around here is when we get some brand new crystal related lore. So recall in Crystal Chronicles 1, the Great Crystal was completely broken. People knew the crystals repelled miasma, but they didn't think much about why it did, or their history beyond, we don't die if we have crystal and myrrh. The Yuke studied it a little bit, but they never found a true answer. And you know, if I was in that situation, I'd probably have the same thought process. I just don't want to die. In Ring of Fates, the Great Crystal is sort of one big piece. Not in the same way it's described as in the original game, but I do have a little theory I'll get to after Echoes of Time about that. Down here, it's just one big chasm of, I guess, the majority of the Great Crystal. While other crystals, such as the one Chalinka has or the save points, are other parts that must have broken off. As told here, the crystals record every outcome that's occurred and every possible future. For example, the saves you left in the game. They essentially have an infinite multiverse inside of them, and whenever someone casts magic, they're tapping into a possible future within the crystals. In terms of the active story, they're more so talking about how Talika, Illyria, and most importantly, Chalinka use those crystals. They can see and potentially alter the future. As for the Crimson Crystals, that goes back to the world's creation. The God of Light, now represented by the Great Crystal, separated evil from itself, turning that evil into the moon. Goldus and Kuchaspel have moon evilness inside of them, and place that moon evil in the crystals. So upon defeating the fake Al, King Kolka feels reinvigorated, and everyone's gonna storm the castle. And from here on, Ring of Fates turns into some Made in Heaven type shit. Just absolutely balls to the wall insane. Okay, you've got the regular old dungeon. I mean, it's the longest and hardest one. You've probably played a video game before, they get harder near the end, but what's coolest to me is how it's structured boss-wise. Because you fight Kuchaspel at the start of the dungeon with Galdus near the end, and said fight with Ku feels satisfying. A chance to beat the shit out of the dude that killed your dad, your maybe cousin, kidnapped your mom, and by proxy, made your sister a mute for 3 years. Yeah, fuck this guy. Easily the biggest shithead in Crystal Chronicles. And boy, Crystal Bears has a bad one in there. That's not to say Galdus is safe from dickheadery either. After all, he sent Dickie to do that shit, and he's got your mom captured. But you know, at least he's nice enough to give us a James Bond villain explanation for his plan. Galdus's end goal is to use the power of the crystals to completely realign the universe into one that benefits him. He'll take whichever of the alternate past, presents, and futures recorded in the crystals that align best with his vision and make it reality, which he can only do today due to an eclipse magnifying moon power. And then the next part gets even more whack. Galdus, 1. New universe is his, everything's changing to his liking, and only those with a connection to the crystal, meaning Yuri, Chelinka, and King Kolka, fully remember the old timeline. Well, new timelines, actually. Galdus changed it a few times before then because he really wanted Yuri to join him. Yuri isn't taking it well. And the worst part is, the world isn't really that bad. I mean, no one has crystals, the sky is red, and Galdus has supreme power, but like, Repentance Ra's fine. Not like people are dying. No, yeah, never mind. Thankfully, the power of family, friendship, and Chelinka's crystal magic is strong enough for the whole party to reunite for a final battle against Supreme Ultra Lord Galdis. But not before Yuri gives Galdus a verbal beatdown.
What's the matter? We're still here, Galdus. You better hurry. A few more steps, and we're there. Afraid that you don't control everything? Not even your own fate.
And it gets worse for Galdus after his boss fight. Yuri and Chelinka tap into their own crystal energy to put Galdus into a never-ending loop of failure. He believes he's gonna hurt Yuri, then bam! New timeline where he's facing the other way, going in this never-ending loop forever. Only problem is, to do that to him, Yuri and Chelinka had to create another universe that everyone else lives in. A universe where everyone has forgotten the two of them. Only exception is King Kolka, as due to the royal bloodline's close affinity to the crystals I mentioned earlier, their fate will stay the same in every universe the crystal sees, meaning his wife and daughter are still dead. So you know, every single person is happy, but no one remembers Yuri and Chelinka. Their struggle won't be in any history books. Chelinka, not happy with the situation, makes a pretty bold decision here. She resets not just their universe, but the entire crystal multiverse, resulting in a new world completely shaped by Chelinka. In this new world, they're back to being kids, their parents live, and if you go through all of multiplayer mode, you find that Talika is also alive since the crystals themselves kinda got reset, giving the twins a happy ending, which, to be honest, feels a bit out of nowhere. I guess maybe she didn't have the emotional capability to pull this off until now? I don't know, it gives me mixed emotions. Her entire journey was wiped away, with only the twins, now happy for the first time in years, knowing what occurred. Meaning, it basically never happened, which I guess is somewhat in line with the original game's story. Back then, only you and your caravan knew that they saved the world, making it a very personal journey. Similarly, this is a personal journey for Yuri and Chelinka. When I finished my replay, I forgot most of the ending. I hadn't played the single player mode in well over a decade, and man, it did not initially sit right with me. But in thinking about the Crystal Chronicle, as in the chronicles within the crystals, it's kinda like Chelinka reset it. This is the new point zero for the crystal's memory. Even if they didn't write a physical book for it, they tucked this away on a shelf, or at least that's how I interpreted it. Overall, I quite enjoyed Ring of Fate's story, by no means my favorite DS RPG, but I think it's worth experiencing. Similar to the first game, the main appeal for me comes from how well it integrates every single dungeon into the world. We learned the importance of every location, so even when you change to the storyless multiplayer where you replay stages with friends, you have a story in your head about each location. And you know, I like the characters here too. Yuri and Chelinka have a strong bond due to their tragedy, and the other three playable characters get a lot of fun moments. Nash especially. Since he doesn't technically need to join the adventure, he has this funny disconnect from the rest of it. Anyways, everything left to say with Ring of Fates connects back to the gameplay, so let's jump to Echoes of Time's story. Of the 4 mainline games, Echoes of Time has the lightest story, so it's not gonna take too long to talk about. From everything I can tell, EOT had a fast development cycle. Even going back to the archives of GameFAQs, IGN, and the other still online sites, there's not many articles or discussion threads pre-release. In fact, the second most common types of comments I see are people asking, why don't we know anything? Which, yeah, that's kind of fair. I don't remember a single bit of marketing besides the release trailer. Well, the most common comments about it after release and even up to today relate to the Nintendo Wii version. Before I talk about its story, I should probably bring this up, because if not, y'all will wonder what's up with footage for the next 10 minutes. Ring of Fate's released only on Nintendo DS. I legally own a copy, played it on DS, but most of y'all probably know that you can't record DS footage without a capture device hard modded onto a 3DS, which is not in my budget. So I played Ring of Fates on Melon DS that upscaled part of Ring of Fates, which is why some of my footage look like this, and some others look like... Due to some touchscreen related gimmicks I'll get to later, I'd recommend playing Ring of Fates on a DS system if possible. On the scale of how much touchscreen does it use, Ring of Fates is teetering very close on the ledge of you need to play it on DS. If you don't own a DS system, then an emulator with a DualSense map to the mouse or an actual mouse next to you is an alright replacement. However, if you own a 3DS, don't own Ring of Fates, and you're open to using an emulator, then you're probably open to doing something surprisingly easy as well. Now with Echoes of Time, this sadly brings up Echoes of Time's biggest legacy, having a Nintendo DS and a Nintendo Wii version. And I don't mean like how Sonic Colors had a Nintendo DS game and a Nintendo Wii game that share little in common besides name. I mean, it's the same game on each. A Nintendo DS game, one reusing a shit ton of assets from Ring of Fates, was ported to the Wii. Releases so identical, they implemented Wi-Fi crossplay. For reference, Ring of Fates was only local play. For examples of how close it is on Wii, we get a built-in 2-screen setup that you can alter with the plus and minus buttons, an option menu that still calls your system a DS, and the ability to use your pointer as a stylus, though every necessity for that is also remapped to the D-pad. When I first played this around 2009 or 2010, I thought this sucked ass. Like, who the fuck wants this? It's so ugly. Why not just play on the DS? And overall, I would still say playing on DS is the way to go. But if you don't have a DS system today in 2024, which I think is likely now, then I'd recommend the Wii version. Like, okay, think of it this way. Would you rather emulate the DS version, where you have to rely on awkward touchscreen workarounds and inconsistent upscaling, or have essentially an Echoes of Time emulator built to perfectly play on Wii? Yeah, as you may guess, playing Ring of Fates on emulator directly before gave me a greater appreciation for this port, and perhaps more than that, owning a widescreen TV. Last time I ran through Echoes of Time, I still had a very shitty CRT that needed a coat hanger shoved in just to press any of the buttons. And you can guess how much I had to squint at that shit. Which is why I'm adding another asterisk: do not play the Wii version on a 4x3 display. You cannot see shit. 100%, I get why the Wii version had such scorching reviews when it came out. This was ugly, but playing it with a Wii remote on a slightly modded Wii U was wonderful, especially with Bryce rejoining me to play on his 3DS for cross-play multiplayer. Speaking of, you'd think more Wii and DS games would communicate, but I cannot think of any besides this and Pokemon off the top of my head. Echoes of Time has a simpler story than Ring of Fates. It still has a linear progression like Ring of Fates and most Final Fantasies, but goes back to custom characters like in the original. A custom character who this time is integrated heavily into the main plot of the story, which is funny because you can play the main campaign in multiplayer this time. And for player 2, in this case Bryce, everyone just bullies you. So everyone just says, hey, I don't know you, I'm waiting for Roman, no thanks, I need Roman first, stuff like that. Players 2 through 4 are chopped liver to any story important character, while the player character, who I named Roman because legal name, comes from an unnamed village in the unnamed forest, a small little place with only a few villagers. Today is Roman's 16th birthday. To celebrate, the close-knit town has prepared a coming-of-age ceremony, which like most dungeon crawlers, means a dungeon. But before going, I wanted to get a good talk in with everyone first. Your starting village in Ring of Fates just had the main cast, while here we've got a whole slew of dudes, and by talking to them you may catch on, Echoes of Time is more lighthearted than the prior 2 dungeon crawlers. Kids bantering together, parents compete over who makes your birthday dinner, older man sleepy, it's a fun little start village, which sets a tone for the game as a whole, while finishing the first dungeon sets the stage for our story. First of all, this girl sitting on the town crystal is Charlotta, a cat girl that found and raised the protagonist since finding him as an abandoned baby in the woods. Charlotta sets the tone a lot here. She's very playful like the rest of the cast, but she's got a more smug attitude than the rest, and a little something underneath we'll come back to. Charlotta knows she's hot shit, but still cares for the player and the village deep down. For completing her trial, she grants the player a tiny crystal, dubbing him a Final Fantasy protagonist. A grand victory, immediately followed by a young girl in the village, Ariel, catching the crystal sickness. A disease that, unless treated with a very specific remedy, leads to death. I bet you can't guess what the first quest is. Roman and his bum-ass ignorable companion Bryce then venture out to find someone with a cure, leading to a spooky, totally not evil bald man that had a very ominous laugh during the intro. What was that other game Square released 12 months later? Our old hopeful friend here is Larketius. He's a pretty smart guy. We know that because he has a book in his hand. And with his intelligence, he promises that he'll make our antidote as long as we get him the ingredients from the aqueducts and then help him with the errands the following day. So we do the first part, cure a real, town is happy, and then we get the new job from Larketius. Travel to the ice mountains and then the fire mountains to hit a switch, and this is when it becomes apparent how light on story Echoes of Time is. Remember in the first 2 how every dungeon has huge implications for the lore of Crystal Chronicles world? And not as much here. Even down to the names, it's just Ice Mountain, the Aqueducts, Library, not really names, just descriptions of the dungeon themes you give to any old location in any old RPG. And most of them don't even have that big of implications to the story of this game, let alone to the series at large. Think of Veolu Sluice, a structure controlling water to irrigate the Clavat's crops and help boats sail, a joint effort between Lilties and Ukes to keep it together. Then there's Rella CL and Ring of Fates, a crystal-powered dam that prevents Ravenna Terra from flooding, a location important to the main character's friends and parents because they couldn't save it. Then there's the Aqueducts. It's the dungeon you go to for the magic item to progress the story, which is the entire motivation for all of Echoes of Time's dungeons. Go to the location to get an item, which removes some of the uniqueness from each of them. Instead of going somewhere because you were imprisoned or saving a forest from poison like in Ring of Fates, we just go to get items. To some of you, this may be a minor issue, but to me, after the other 2, it is kind of important, especially when it's Echoes of Time's biggest problem. It makes me think that they really just wanted to make more Ring of Fates levels and improve on its faults, which in terms of dungeon design and gameplay, it certainly does, but we're still just talking about story. It disconnects Echoes of Time a bit more from the other games than I would have liked. Even looking at the main map, I have no clue where we are geographically. I know the era, it's between Ring of Fates and the original, but no idea where. And you don't need the story to connect to the other entries for it to be good, but when the rest of them are clearly connected, it's just something a little awkward here. Anyways, after Roman hits the 2 switches, Larketius uses some lasers to open up a gate that releases new monsters, create a giant pillar at the bottom of a trench, and cracks the village crystal, which somehow causes every villager except Ariel to disappear. With no idea on what really to do, the heroes decided they're gonna collect every crystal shard to repair it, which is it story-wise for the next 6 dungeons. Okay, that's not entirely true. That's the hero's MO, but on the journey you learn about Larketius' motives and the starter village's past. You see, Larketius and his Uke apprentice Varialdi, who appears as one boss and never again, are immortal. 2,000 years ago, Larketius crafted and implemented tons of high-tech gadgets into society. Technology more advanced than what we'd see in Crystal Chronicles 1. Only problem, it required crystals to power it. And one day, all the crystals just went away. Not because the people used them up, that'd make sense. Instead, a big explosion hundreds of miles into the sky in the present day was big enough to cause a shockwave 2,000 years ago to make the crystals go bye-bye. And since Larketius introduced the crystal-powered machinery, he got embarrassed by the whole thing, meaning persecuted by townsfolk. He then frantically searched for more crystals, tested how to become immortal, and desired to stop the shockwave in the future. Given that he's currently alive, we know that he got the immortality down. But how's he gonna stop the shockwave? Well, that's the point of his tower. He's just gonna physically stop it, at the very top of it. So we're gonna stop him. Kinda simple as that. Only other plotline going on has to do with Charlotta, and honestly this one is fun, if not with some dark themes. As it turns out, 2,000 years ago, Larkishus destroyed the village you grew up in, killing everyone except Charlotta. Charlotta only escaped because the town crystal saved her. Not super saved though. Larkishus couldn't kill her, but he still kidnapped and experimented on her, which turned her into an immortal that produced crystals. And the only reason she's still walking with us is because she put her consciousness into a cat. Then after wandering around for 2,000 years, she found the main character as a baby, and due to her desire to care for him, the crystal created a new version of the town. I know that sounds like I lore dumped a lot, and that's because the game kinda dumps it too. Not much is portrayed naturally to you, and I think I'd care a little more if it weren't for the tone it takes from here on. So I've been saying Echoes of Time is lighthearted, and from here on, it really shows. With the crystal repaired, Charlotta's also back to life and joins the main characters on their journey. Not in a playable sense, but she still talks to villagers, shows up in pre-rendered cutscenes, and is basically the main character now. She's the one with a vendetta against Larkishus, she's the one with a connection to the crystals, she's the one who knows where to go, she's the protagonist of the story. And while it is a huge shift, it's kinda for the better. Charlotta's extremely likable. As a 2,000-year-old cat girl, she gets pretty snarky with the idiotic villagers of the town. Like, remember how I said in Ring of Fates everyone has new dialogue when you finish a dungeon, and that typically it's on the more relevant to the story side? Well, that's the same in Echoes of Time, but unlike Ring of Fates, where people usually talk about current happenings, everyone in Echoes of Time does not give a shit. It goes a completely comedic route with everyone in town just fucking around, partially because they don't know shit about what's going on. The whole story was kicked off by an event 2,000 years ago, and from their perspective, there's just some old dude that lives in the library, left the library, there's a big old tower out in the distance. Like, seriously, why would these peasant guys care? And because of that, we get fun dialogue that not only gets a chuckle in the moment, but has long-term payoff every time you return. For example, there's this one mom and her daughter. At first, the daughter's a shithead, just being a typical little girl in a city. Then later on, after Charlotta pretends to be a forest witch, the daughter becomes a perfect child, doing anything her mom asks of her, which the mom thinks weird and then tries everything to get her to stop, from pleading with her kid and even hiring a child psychiatrist to make her go back. Legit, talking to the citizens of Unnamed Town is by far the best part of Echoes of Time story for me. There's so much charm here, but it's difficult for me to describe more in a video because then I'm just giving away jokes. And I can't give away jokes, then you have no point in hearing them. So I'm gonna give away one more joke. This is the Undead Princess. She is the best character in the game. So back after Charlotta joins you, you spend the next few dungeons searching for a staff that'll harness the Undead Princess's power to reach Larky, which of course involves beating up the Undead Princess first. UP's really full of herself when you first meet at the graveyard, tries to scare everyone away, but then after you beat her boss fight, she gets super docile. She's upset about getting forced onto a journey, stuck in a tiny metal magic piece. And even then, she still makes fun of Charlotta constantly, usually in relation to their age, since Charlotta's 2000 and UP died only 800 years ago. From here on, her bantering with Charlotta made the story for me, to the point where I kinda just wish they were in the party from the start, because this composition of the two of them with the player doesn't last very long. Only 4 dungeons and 2 of them are revisits. Now, I did recently learn that they reappear in World of Final Fantasy, and yeah, that knowledge made me buy the game. Haven't played it yet, no spoilers please. Anyways, then you reach the typical endgame double dungeon. And the ending is, I'm not gonna say a letdown, but it's about what you expect. You get to the top, find Charlotta's real body, Larkishus gets a wacky final boss form, and you fight it. Nothing you don't expect in an RPG. Only one tiny little twist happens here. So Larkishus is waiting up here for the event that destroys the crystals 2,000 years ago, right? An explosion that should happen way up high in the sky. Well, this tower that we're in answers how exactly something happened way up here. At this moment, Charlotta summons the town crystal, which is actually a manifestation of herself, and requests the protagonist to destroy the crystal, in turn killing Larkishus, Charlotta, and every crystal across the land. A sad, though honestly not unseen, fate.
Thank you.
After the hero gets out, it ends with him going back to his now almost empty village and placing the one crystal Charlotta gave him back at the start where her old crystal was, maybe to bring the crystals back in the future. And that's where Echoes of Time ends. A fairly by-the-book story, mostly coasting by on the likability of the NPCs, Charlotta, and the undead princess. Like, I know that was a very short story segment, but I really want to stress how likable the people are in this game. They're so unaware of the current circumstances that it's hilarious. It even keeps up the aspect from the past two of no one knowing your tale because of it. But instead of everyone's busy living through miasma or universe reset, it's because everyone's just fucking stupid. Most of the townsfolk will talk about Larketius positively as a scholar because they just have no clue what went on. I love it in the context of playing today, though thinking back to when it was new, yeah, this was kind of a low bar for a Wii game. I don't think it was full price, or at the very least the price tag on my copy said $20, but it's not on par with a majority of games parading the Final Fantasy name. I think the minimal story by Final Fantasy standards is where the short dev process shows the most. I'm guessing they focused most on getting this Wii port working and refining the gameplay of Ring of Fates. Though before I move to the DS game's shared aspects, let's talk about the greater lore implications Echoes of Time has, since it's not too much. So first off, let's talk about the timeline. The important part is this: Echoes of Time takes place long before the original game, and at minimum, about 2,100 years after Ring of Fates. Larketius brought a bunch of cool tech to society 2,000 years ago, which doesn't happen overnight, and the crystals all broke at the end. While in Ring of Fates, the crystals are very common, meaning a significant period of time must pass between the two. So I'm thinking there's 1,000 between Ring of Fates and Larketius' rise to power, and then the crystals blowing up at the end is what led to Rabenete Ra's downfall. Of course, no more crystals doesn't mean a downfall in the pre-miasma days, but with how much Rabenete Ra relied on the great crystal beneath it, I think it's possible that if the crystal died then, so did the city, following which the Selkies, the tribe holding the throne, had a nomadic period. A theory I'm partially basing on how in Echoes of Time, their garb has more furs and loose clothes like the original game, giving the feeling that they went through that change. Again, like what I said with the Selkies earlier, this is my own headcanon, not based on anything official, just some theorizing. And while I'm on the track of theorizing, let's theorize about crystals. So we all know that a meteor destroyed the Great Crystal and then started the miasma. We know this for a fact because we fought the meteor parasite that caused it. We've also seen the Great Crystal in Ring of Fates, a crystal that's deep beneath Rabenete Ra, a crystal which, no matter how great, Larketius must have destroyed between the two games. So how do we make sense of a meteor hitting and destroying a Great Crystal? Well, this is my own theory. I think the crystal, placed at the end of Echoes of Time, may have turned into a new Great Crystal. A lot of time passes between Echoes of Time and the original game. Perhaps that one crystal replanted grew over the next few thousand years. There's no consistent source on how much time passes between each game. When researching, the only source with a number was Wikipedia at 8,000 years between Ring of Fates and the original, but that's not sourced well, though even if we use that 8,000 number as a reference, I think we have enough time for this magical crystal to magically grow. My theory takes some suspension of disbelief, in a game with fantasy in the title, who knew, but I'd say it checks out. At the very least, enough for me to accept it as my personal headcanon, and move on to the gameplay stuff. So as I've already said, these two share almost everything gameplay related. All Echoes of Time does is refine the minor problems with Ring of Fates and tones down on touchscreen stuff. On top of that, both base themselves heavily off of the original's backbone. You still have the normal combos, focus attacks, magic attacks, a focus on multiplayer, and fusion you can do with the little reticles. Going from any one of the 3 dungeon crawlers to one of the other 2 should not feel like a big change. To go into how I played the 2 for this video, I need to talk about the modes first. First, the single players. In Ring of Fates, the mode with the story is only single player. Here you get a party of 4 with Yuri, Meath, Al, and Nash, who you can change as whenever you want by using the touchscreen. Well, in Echoes of Time, you can also change with the touchscreen or the D-pad on Wii, but all of your party members are custom characters created by you, or bonus guys with fun outfits you find by performing crazy achievements. For example, having 100 hours of playtime, when the main campaign takes about 14 hours leisurely with some side side quests. While for 2-player mode, they both have something different. As I mentioned before, in Ring of Fates, multiplayer is 100% separate from single player. You make your own character, link up with a friend, and you play the dungeons without a real story going on. Technically, it takes place in the post-Chelinka reset universe, but besides some fan service where we see the main cast at home or a revived MILF, the story doesn't change. I used to play this mode pretty frequently with Bryce and our cousin, usually during lunch at school. Since we all played the main campaign individually, going into the dungeons without one here didn't matter too much. And some of the equipment got crazy once you bumped up to hard and very hard modes. However, I don't really have footage of that today. Recording DS multiplayer on emulators isn't quite there yet, and playing multiplayer mode by yourself, something they allow, sucks hard. Later bosses are designed where you have either friends or AI companions, and I definitely didn't have the patience to do that on the emulator. For the sake of writing, I did play it on 3DS with Bryce for a little bit, not the whole way for scheduling reasons, but y'all aren't gonna see any footage of that, and 95% of those thoughts count for Echoes of Time as well, which I could record in multiplayer. Echoes of Time multiplayer is identical to single player, only instead of having AI companions, you have your friends. Anytime you are playing Echoes of Time, walk up to a save point and you can invite friends into your party, at which point they journey with you throughout everything. It does have a slight problem where only the host save file progresses the story, but since I hosted and realistically neither of us will come back to this on single player, that's not a big problem. Honestly, I wish the remaster of the original took this route as well. Have a friend join your caravan on your journey until they go back to their game. The GameCube version could actually transfer someone from another memory card like that too. It wouldn't be the perfect resolution to fix the remaster's poor multiplayer, but damn, it'd be leagues above what we did get. Anyways, Bryce played Echoes of Time with me. Him a Selkie, while I went with a Lilty. Unlike the original, I didn't feel like I needed to get footage of all 4 races because Ring of Fates already forces you to use all 4 in the main campaign. So to simplify the footage y'all are about to see, Ring of Fates footage mostly on single player mode with AI companions I can switch between, Echoes of Time footage, all of it's on multiplayer mode with my brother. Cool. Main way to start looking at the gameplay is with the hardware again. Going from using GBAs with a shared TV screen to DSs with individual screens and more buttons led to a lot of improvement. First off, no more chalice. It originally kept the party together so the screen didn't need to stretch, but now that everyone's screen follows their own character, there's no point in that. Which, when paired with only needing one system and one game copy each, immediately makes the duo more approachable than the original. So now, when advancing through dungeons, you have a few extra options on how to approach each room. You can split up to defeat enemies on both sides, divert focus to beat one at a time quickly, have one guy solve puzzles while the others deal with enemies. It's up to you and your party. In multiplayer at least, I should add that your AI partners in single player are dumb as bricks. Like, holy shit, thank God Ring of Fates has an engaging enough story, because playing with 3 AI is a step down from even one other human. The next big benefit to the new system is the change in controls. We have 2 extra buttons plus an entire touchscreen to work with on the DS, which is enough to totally overhaul everything. The menu-based one action combat is gone. Lifting items, attacking, magic, and jumping all have their own buttons now. And thanks to the touchscreen, you don't even need buttons to select your magic since you can do it with your thumb. If you want to equip Blizzard, just tap the Blizzard icon and now you can cast it with X. Super convenient when playing on DS or even on Wii where you can also use the D-pad. Though it's absolutely wretched when playing on an emulator with a DualSense, this is the main reason I'd recommend playing DS if possible. It's not the worst thing around, it's not like playing The World Ends With You or Sonic Rush Adventure minigames with a mouse. You can get through it, but it still kinda blows. Either way, magic itself works the same as on GameCube. Create a little ring, partners confuse rings, and anything in the ring is either healed or harmed. As a tip, pressing L warps your AI partners back behind you in single player, so if y'all are getting your asses kicked, warp everyone and then heal right there. Easy cure for everyone. Besides that, the magic mechanics go unchanged, so not much to say beyond rewatch the old video. I guess as you level up, you unlock the ability to lock a ring so you can stack an extra on top of it without an extra player, but honestly, the necessity for that never came up. Timing with extra players is faster, and if you have an AI partner, you can tap their icon, so they'll cast a spell too, meaning the only time this would be needed is for a few specific timing-based puzzles or when playing Ring of Fates multiplayer by yourself, which is sad. I know because I've done it. For sure, the biggest change to your controls is the jump button. This right here changes everything about dungeon design in the DS Duo. In the original game, dungeons were fairly straightforward. Normally a typical path to the end, some with a core gimmick you worked around like the keys in Demon's Court, or a minor gimmick like some water spouts at Veolus Luce that also give you keys. Normally, they consisted of 2 to 3 very large rooms. In the original game, layouts were not the main appeal. It was the lore and atmosphere. While in Ring of Fates and especially Echoes of Time, the appeal of their dungeons come from the layouts. I've already mostly gone over the lore stuff about Ring of Fates and the lack thereof for Echoes of Time, so I'll skip over that for what they actually look like. Instead of the 2 or 3 giant rooms like in the original, these two have a bunch of small interconnected rooms. Take a door to lead to that room, which leads to this one, and maybe that room loops back to the first room. Closer in design to a traditional Final Fantasy, or perhaps most closely with Ys 3, the Oath in Felghana. In fact, there's maybe a few more comparisons to Ys 3 we could make. For example, the basic combos have sped up a lot. Not to Ys 3 levels, which I'll stop using as an example because I know few of y'all have played it, but still pretty fast. Combos feel snappier than in Crystal Chronicles 1, where everyone had a long cooldown and a bit of a delay to their hits. While here, they've sped up considerably. You can get one hit and run without issue. Unless you're doing like a full 5-hit combo, then you gotta time it well. But depending on your choice of race, you don't really have a problem with that, as everyone's base attack has changed, and in Ring of Fates, that means the Clavats with their swords have a 5-hit combo, the Lilties have a 3-hit combo with hammers, Silkies have bows that shoot from a range, and the Uke staves do something cool. They have a normal close-range donk attack, but they also throw out a black magicite that blows up at a medium range. And while that normal hit uses their attack stat, the black magicite uses a Uke's magic stat, making their normal attack more usable since their higher stat is at play, which while the topic is open, stat growth is normal. We're going back to the typical experience points and levels, which I wasn't gonna harp on, but in between voicing parts 1 and 2, I started playing Square's Saga series. I beat the first 2 Game Boy games, plus played some of Minstrel Songs so far, and there I realized that the progression system of the original is kinda similar to Saga. In the original Saga on Game Boy, humans level up stats with consumable potions, while robots in the second game raise stats by equipping attacks, which isn't too far from how the artifact system worked in Crystal Chronicles 1. Romancing Saga then goes to a more Final Fantasy II type approach, but for beating the journey, I believe it also has the finish when you want aspect like Crystal Chronicles had. I'm not too far in yet, and honestly it's one of the more confusing RPGs I've played in a while, so I'm probably nearing up on a guide time. Either way, the 2 DS Crystal Chronicles have a fairly normal stat system, and the only difference between the two is that Echoes of Time makes a few of the hidden stats like elemental resistances and stun visible. Back to the dungeons. With the change of ethos, I think the designers got really into the idea of making every room its own tiny challenge, either based on puzzles, combat, platforming, or likely a mix of all 3. When it comes to combat, the appeal of it is the exact same as on Gamecube. Figure out how to position your team, time your hits compared to the enemy, and know their weakness. The only big changes here are having a jump which helps for dodging some attacks or hitting aerial enemies, and a little bit in the focus attacks. No more reticles and no more weapon-specific focus attacks. Instead, you can walk around during the charge period, and the attack is specific to a weapon type, which in Ring of Fates basically means unique to each tribe since every tribe only has one attack type, while in Echoes of Time, anyone can use any weapon, though there are certain weapons preferred to certain tribes, including the rackets and spears returning for Silkies and Lilties after they skipped Ring of Fates. While you can technically use anything, focus attacks and number of hits in a combo are tied to your level, with tribes learning abilities connected to their expected weapon earlier than a different tribe, meaning that yes, at level 99 you can have a Clavat using a bow fine enough, but since you're gonna be around level 50 when beating the game on normal mode, you should just stick with the sword. With the exception of the Lilties in Ring of Fates, every focus attack in both games is basically just the big charge attack like you'd see in any game with a charge move. Not that it's bad to take that approach, there's a reason why so many games do this, it just kinda removes the uniqueness of the reticle-based focus attacks that the original game had. Not to a huge degree though, we still have the reticle when using magic, so that unique method still has some DNA in the game, it's just missing to the amount where it's worth pointing out. Moving on, when it comes to puzzles and platforming, the two deviate a bit from each other. Most obvious thing to notice off the bat is with the layouts. Ring of Fates has a tendency to make rooms into perfect square spaces that connect to other square spaces. Because of that, a majority of individual rooms then focus on verticality. Your final stop is at the top of the current room or at the bottom. I'm guessing it's because they got a little excited about the platforming they added in. In some dungeons like the forest, it uses this well. Upon reaching a higher elevation in a later room, room, you loop back to upper floors of prior rooms where you can hit the switches you need to proceed. It works well in later dungeons play with that interconnectivity even more. For example, in Relic CL, you get to play with the water levels. And don't worry, it's not as annoying as the water temple in Ocarina of Time. It's easy to change and you don't have any iron boots. It's also more straightforward than the water temple in Ocarina because they didn't add swimming until Echoes of Time. In Ring of Fates, falling into water just makes you lose a bit of damage and you warp back up Mario Kart style. And now that I look back of it, a lot of hazards in Ring of Fates involve the floor is lava type thing. Quite literally when the floor is actually lava. Stay too long on certain surfaces and you suffer a status ailment like poison or freeze. At some points it kind of feels like they were trying to stretch out or maybe fill some rooms with these floors, as if they didn't have ideas for more enemies or puzzles in that specific room, and thus decided to just put in a few of these scary floors. It becomes very noticeable when you do Calandra Mountain with the long stretches of fire floors, only 2 dungeons before the past version of Relic CL, which is a much tighter dungeon with something different to do every few steps. And in Ring of Fates, what you do pretty often involves tribe-specific abilities. In ROF, everyone has at least one puzzle-solving ability that the other tribes lack. Klavots can down-thrust their swords onto rusted buttons, Selkies shoot targets and have a double jump, Ukes create ladders and platforms and can light candles to progress at certain sensitive spots, and Lilties have a cauldron with a ton of mechanics. I'm guessing since the Liltie tribe hadn't gone on their Imperial conquest yet, they needed some way to make them unique without the good weapons. So in the Ring of Fates era, they practice alchemy with a big ol' cauldron. Said cauldron is used for context-sensitive panels to make you fly, ward off toxins like the chalice in the original, and even in their focus attack as a spin dash reminiscent of Sonic 3D Blast, thus having them use the cauldron for both puzzles and combat. These tribe-specific abilities work fine for single player. It motivates you to try all 4 of the races, since after you change into one for a puzzle, you'll likely stay as them for another minute or 2. The Selkies double jump especially coming in handy. Tall ledges that normally would require a full circle around the room become trivial with the double jump, so I ended up using Nash the most after I wiped out all the enemies. It's also the only tribe-specific gimmick they kept for Echoes of Time, which I'm pretty okay with, since all the others kinda broke the pace, especially the touchscreen related ones. For example, the Uke context stuff I mentioned earlier, yeah, that requires the touchscreen. And the other 3 tribes have a touchscreen gimmick too. For Klavots and Selkies, it's just an extra attack you perform by tapping an enemy, which in most cases inflicts less damage than a focus attack, while the Lilties craft Magicite in a pot. Which yeah, before I get to that, Magicite works differently in both of these than the original. For Ring of Fates, you don't just find Magicite and have it infinitely for the remainder of the dungeon. Now they're finite resources. You pick up a fire Magicite, you have 1 extra use of fire. Managing that magic usage becomes a huge deal in Ring of Fates. And by extension, I feel it nerfs the Uke a little bit, which might explain why they gave him the dark magic during his normal attack. You know, just to even him out a little. Then for Echoes of Time, it changes magic to a traditional MP bar. Select your spell, and if you have MP, you can cast what you want, as you have all 6 the moment your journey begins, which by extension removes the necessity to make Magicite in the cauldron, resulting in them removing that, as well as the other tribe-specific touchscreen gimmicks, likely because they broke the pace, and because they knew it would have sucked to use them on the Wii version. For the specifics of the cauldron thing, it's kind of like a cooking mama type of shit. You get certain magic ingredients, put them in the pot, swirl, bam, pops out a Magicite. In multiplayer mode, if you have a Liltie on your team, they can infinitely keep making Magicite at the right moment. However, again, it's a pace breaker, and I am glad it's not there anymore. Moving on, I guess now I'll list the other differences in Echoes of Time. I feel like I've made Ring of Fate sound way better than Echoes of Time during the story section. I found it way more engaging as it told a character-focused story and expanded the lore of the original, but for straight-up mechanical dungeon crawling and layouts, Echoes of Time has a step up. While the first game is closer to my heart, I'm gonna have to say that Echoes of Time has the best dungeons at a mechanical and design level. First off, the dungeon mechanics. Ring of Fates use those tribe-specific abilities in each dungeon, ones that you got used to over the course of the game, while Echoes of Time has you interact with unique dungeon items. A pretty common one is these barrels. You use some to freeze water to walk over it, and others blow up. Whenever they appear, you know you need to survey the room to figure out where they should go. Maybe you need to push a block through the icy waters, or maybe there's a wall to destroy. It indicates to the player what they should survey. Then there's the library with a ton of magic books and bookcases. Placing these in specific places causes different effects in the room. Not the most out there ideas, but it makes the dungeons feel unique from each other without using something turbo gimmicky. Every stage mechanic they throw at you feels in line with your character's moveset of magic, attacking, and throwing stuff. and each room in Echoes of Time is made a bit more compact. Like I said, Ring of Fates feels like they wanted everything to be a large square, while in Echoes of Time you don't have wide spaces unless the room really deserved it. For example, this room at Fire Mountain. It's a perfect, fairly large rectangle that never wastes your time. Starts with an enemy, then it introduces a new mechanic where you throw water at fire, platforming, room's over. And that was also only half the room. You experience the other half when you return here later in the story, something Echoes of Time has you do often, and I'm a little torn on that. On one hand, when you return, you take mostly new paths that line back up with the old one, giving you essentially 2 dungeons in one. As I said last time, I liked returning to dungeons in the original, where paths changed less severely, so I should probably like this a lot. However, the original game was a play-at-your-own pace type of deal, while Echoes of Time is a straightforward narrative, where each individual dungeon's narrative is already the weakest in the series. For comparison, Ring of Fates had 2 returns as well, Riel Ciel and Mount Val, both of which had very significant reasons in the narrative to return. Mount Val you initially go with Al for an errand, and when you go back, it's to save Al after he was kidnapped. Do you get what I'm saying here? Echoes of Time can have as good of dungeons as possible, but without a strong motivation to go to each, they're not as memorable to me as the ones in Ring of Fates or the original. I'll excuse a revisit to a Ring of Fates dungeon, while in Echoes of Time, I hesitate to do the same. Throughout all of them, the only thing in the dungeons that adds to the lore of Crystal Chronicles as a whole is the technology you find in the ruins and the final areas. It feels reminiscent to old FFs like 1, 3, and 5, where there's an old ancient civilization that left around technology, but at the end of the day, it only adds to Echoes of Time's narrative. It doesn't impact much of the rest of the series, like what most of Ring of Fates and the original put forward. I want to say, despite that, Echoes of Time is still a fun multiplayer dungeon crawler. I didn't play it as often with my friends back in the day like I did with Ring of Fates in the original, but if you want something y'all can jump immediately into, Echoes of Time might actually win between the 3. You still have a story mode to play together with custom characters, as well as a mission mode. Here you perform normal side quest type jobs like put out fires, defeat a specific enemy, or rescue cows. These quests are also in Ring of Fates multiplayer, but no footage for reasons you'll already know. These work as a fun distraction from the main quest and as a good way to nab rarer items and scrolls, which becomes really easy in Echoes of Time. Ring of Fates kept this mechanic from the original where you lost a scroll after crafting an item, while Echoes removed that because it's kinda stupid. Once you have a scroll for making some equipment, you have it, meaning you can put a wide variety of silly stuff on anyone. And you know what, let's end this talk about the DS games with the presentation. The art and graphics team did a great job of translating Crystal Chronicles art style to the DS. Everyone's a tad bit more SD looking, which really isn't too far from the GameCube game anyways. Most of the tribes have a slight squish on them, besides the little T's who look basically unchanged. Pretty charming in my opinion, especially with all the armor. There's significantly more armor than the first game, and every time you equip something, it changes how your character looks. Some reference mainline Final Fantasy jobs like Dragoons and Black Mages, while others look like characters in other Crystal Chronicles games. For example, you can unlock Lyle's jacket when you reach hard mode of Ring of Fates, which makes you look like Lyle, the main character of Crystal Bearers. Back in the day, my friends and I had a lot of fun with this in Ring of Fates, though today I didn't really feel like grinding for the rougher equipment. I'm realistically only coming back to these on multiplayer, which as of today still requires local play. I believe the guys working on Melon DS have come close to cracking a netplay code, so once they do that, you can bet your ass I'll be forcing some friends to play this with me, because one thing I want to stress, these two are both very easy to get into on multiplayer. The story is basically gone in Ring of Fates during 2-player mode, and Echoes of Time's light-hearted nature makes it easier to laugh at it with your friends. I know I'm ending this part seemingly preemptively, but there's not a whole lot left to say without talking about every minute detail. And y'all have seen my videos, despite the long length, I don't really do that. While I did play both of these games in my childhood, I'm not quite as attached to either of these as I am the original. I played Ring of Fates a lot around middle school, and I gave Echoes of Time a playthrough when I bought it, but it's hard for me to look at them as fondly when again, Square Enix's DS lineup was stacked. I spent way more time with Final Fantasy IV and the 2 Kingdom Hearts games back when I was younger. And even today, if I ask any of my friends what was the best Square Enix DS game, they'll list another top level game I can't debate with. Flaffy said Rocket Slime and Dragon Quest IX, while ranting about the rest of Dragon Quest's DS outputs, while Bryce said The World Ends With You. As much as I love these 2 dungeon crawlers, games, they had no chance of standing out compared to Square's other outputs. However, I still really think they're worth playing, especially if you and a friend still have a DS or 3DS system. They're not very long, there's no big problems, and they continue the world from the original GameCube game. Alright, for the first time in one of my more recent videos, I'm just gonna get right to it. No long history, no tirades, no context, just review time. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, My Life as a King, and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, My Life as a Dark Lord, released on WiiWare in 2008 and 2009 respectively, with My Life as a King releasing at the launch of the WiiWare. Wait a minute, I do have a small younger audience. Let's go over what the fuck a WiiWare is. When Nintendo launched the Wii in 2006, it had a cool feature known as the Wii Shop. At first, you used it to buy old games on NES, Genesis, N64, Neo Geo, and more. This service is actually how I first experienced a few old games like Ninja Gaiden or Paper Mario. It was pretty cool. Some systems like Genesis and Super NES had fairly passable emulators by then, but at the time, my family only had one desktop, and being 8, I only knew the bare minimum about emulation. Even when I got it going, I had to play with a keyboard. So a service that let me play Mario 2 on a CRT with a GameCube controller and no limit of my dad needs to send work emails had some appeal to it. In fact, even my dad had fun reliving a few games on Virtual Console. I remember at one point after they added Ogre Battle 64, he'd come home from work, play it for a bit, then he'd pick me up from dance practice, and I'd find that he left the game on because he didn't reach a good stopping point. But the Virtual Console isn't today's important topic. Around the same time, Microsoft had the Xbox Live Arcade on the 360. It let you download new, small games directly to your system. No discs needed. Then, Sony released a similar platform on PS3. So to compete, Nintendo came out with the WiiWare, a similar, though vastly inferior platform. The size of a WiiWare game could go no larger than 40 megabytes, while Xbox Live, at the time of WiiWare's launch, was over 150 megabytes. Then, by the time of Dark Lord, Live Arcade games could go to over 2 gigabytes. It alienated a lot of developers, though others tried to work with the limits. While I haven't played them, I remember the Bit Trip series having a strong following for a little bit. Capcom also made Mega Man 9 and 10 within WiiWare specs and put the first home ports of Ace Attorney on WiiWare, which was the first time I got to play Ace Attorney 2 and 3, and actually the only home port to keep the GBA sprites rather than use the HD sprites. Saying that, a majority of WiiWare games kinda teetered on the edge of game you'd expect on console and PC, or app you'd expect on iPhone, and sometimes ones you'd expect on flip phones. Keep in mind, the Wii as a console tried to give you that TV feeling. It's why they added apps like the Everybody Votes channel, where you vote on random polls, or the Nintendo channel to watch trailers and early footage of upcoming games. You flip channels that happen to include games. It gave the system a novelty that no others have really surpassed. Like, yeah, it's less intuitive than modern UI like the Switch or PS5, but it had some heart to it. It's just that the novelty bled into the WiiWare lineup. For every Ace Attorney port, you had 5 sexy pokers. And because of that, the Wii doesn't have nearly as many download games people look back on as fondly as the PS3 or the 360. Honestly, I'm probably one of the more fond guys out there towards it, and even then I have stronger memories of playing Third Strike Online on PS3 than anything on WiiWare. Anyways, the My Life games came out on WiiWare. I actually never owned them as a kid because by WiiWare standards they were a little pricey. However, I did get to play the demo of My Life as a Dark Lord a lot, and I got to experience My Life as a King at a friend's place, I think 2 different times. It made me curious what the full game was like, what new surprises it had in store, how it would evolve. So after the Wii Shop service went offline, I modded my Wii U and put the games on here. No legal way to buy them anymore, so who gives a shit? And damn, let me say, I didn't realize I got most of the experience from the demos already. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles My Life as a King is a standard town builder game like The Sims, while My Life as a Dark Lord is a standard tower defense game like, I don't know, pick a random one on Newgrounds. Yeah, sure. This one. I don't even know which one I'm showing yet. Because of that, they feel like games you're supposed to play for like 20 or 30 minutes after school. The experience doesn't change much over the 10 to 15 hours each, which I want to mention because, hey, guess how scheduling video production works? Right off the bat, I cannot recommend either of these as a binge on a weekend type of game. You'll get bored very fast. I didn't record well over 3/4 of my Dark Lord run, and I lost footage of about half my King run, and I don't really feel like that's gonna impede my editing. I'm gonna make it clear right now, while I don't hate these two, I did not enjoy 100% everything in either of these, and that is gonna show in what I say about them. So let's quickly go through the story stuff. My Life as a King takes place shortly after the original game. Now that the miasma has dissipated, civilians can settle wherever they want. No more do they need to rely on the crystals. So immediately the main characters settle right next to a crystal. Okay, they have some reason for doing this. Our main cast consists of a young kid, his older sister type aide Chime, and his royal knight Hugh Yerg. After the miasma took apart their homeland, they traveled around aimlessly. Now that it's gone, the groups came to this open area that the king's father once ruled over. However, right now, it's lost everything. Only the crystal that once warded off miasma remains. And a very fucking big castle. The young king and his retinue plan to rebirth the town. Awaken it in this post-miasma age, which you can't do until you name the town and the king. For consistency, I decided to name the town Tits 2, and to stay relevant with a young, irresponsible king suddenly thrust into a job he's clearly not cut out for, I named him Charles. Upon arrival, the crystal grants Charles the power of architect, allowing him to create any building he can envision as long as he has a material known as elementite. Thankfully, the buildings come packaged with a free citizen and their young, draftable teenager, so you can send them off to dungeons to find more elementite and perform other tasks. I have now described the entire basics of the gameplay. King Charles wakes up, sends teenagers to fight battles while staying at home, makes his advisor wear a bunny girl bikini, and places buildings wherever you want. This really is a My Life as a King. Story-wise, the rest is by the book's RPG stuff. An evil demon lord is out there, he captured Charles's father, you eventually save the father, and there was much rejoicing. Nothing you haven't heard before. My Life as a King is sold on the charm carried over from the original Crystal Chronicles. To be perfectly honest, not enough charm to carry a full day and a half straight of the exact same thing, but enough where I'm sure I would have turned the game on for half an hour before bed in 2009. To get more in-depth, the main goal you have besides rescuing your father is to grow your kingdom, something you accomplish in two ways: increase the town's prestige by raising morale, and building structures in your little sandbox. When you begin, Charles can only build 10 two-story clavat homes and one single bakery, as he can only create what his mind envisions, and he mostly lived cooped up in a castle or on the road. He needs someone to describe or draw new structures to him, which is what the returning tutorial Moogles do, as well as adventurers if you send them on the right quests. There's a grocery store and bakery that increase morale, parks that let you assign more quests per day, item shops and inn for visiting adventurers to assist your adventurers, special schools for adventurers to change jobs or upgrade skills, and if you bought the DLC, then you can make homes for the other 3 tribes. Honestly, it's a little scummy that they locked 3/4 of the series' iconic tribes behind DLC, but no one is ever going to pay real money for the DLC here or in Dark Lord, so it's hard for me to complain all that much. Even in the unlikely scenario where they get a re-release, they'll likely bundle in the DLC, so they can charge you for some other new DLC down the road. Anyways, it's a little hard for me to say more about the buildings other than listing off their primary functions. It's all exactly as it says on the tin. Only extra thing you can do to a building is give them money to upgrade their items or skills, which sounds not too interesting on paper, and that's because it's kinda not. Your core experience stays the same from around day 10 to the ending. Your only change as the game progresses is that on some days you stop at a few more places. During the early game, you walk to a billboard, check if your adventurer has the energy to go somewhere, decide if they go, then maybe build something. Later on, you'll add additional stops to shops and schools to fund them, which doesn't really change much of what you do each day. The adventurers have the adventure, you stay at home. You could also improve the town's prestige by talking to citizens and adventurers, but doing so doesn't affect much. It just unlocks extra quests that feel the same as any other. Because of that, talking to everyone ends up making it take longer, since you need to wait for people willing to talk to you. You end up standing in the middle of town waiting for citizens to walk by so you can get an upgrade that's all in all pretty minor. On top of that, My Life as a King fucking chugs once the town gets big enough. On my modded Wii U, I had times where it felt like 10 frames per second, and when you built buildings, there's tons of blocks on screen, and that felt more like 5 frames. I'm guessing the frame rate has to do with all of what's going on. We're playing a very small WiiWare game where an entire town is active all at once. Even if you don't see it, the system is rendering everyone's actions at the same time, which for the very first download title on a underpowered system even by its day, I guess that's expected. I think the main problem isn't what you're doing, but the perspective. Life as a King is essentially an idle game. You set up buildings wherever you want, say who goes where, and then they go off to do it. A majority of these types of games are designed for phones or PC with a mouse or finger in mind. Compare it to Roller Coaster Tycoon, a top-down simulation where you can quickly click on what you want to do, while My Life as a King has a fully 3D over-the-shoulder perspective, which means that every minor change you want to do to your city requires a walk all the way over to where your problem is, which when paired with massive slowdown after playing for 7 hours, got tiresome for me. I would have preferred a typical top-down format most city builders had. However, from looking at GameFAQs forums and Twitter searches, I know this game is special to a few people, and the full 3D immersion probably helped with that. I can't think of any other town builders like this, though I admit it's nowhere close to my most played genre. Since all the buildings are still on a grid system, I think something in between like the slanted top-down view the DS games had would have worked better. Even My Sims on Wii had that going on with pointer functionality, and I think both of those could have helped. Alternatively, My Life as a King has a full city view mode you can access, but by doing this you can't walk or perform any actions, so what if by doing this you could use a pointer to quickly perform actions, like click on an open area to make a building or the same for destroying one. Just some ideas in case a remaster ever happens. And if a remaster does happen, it'd probably come with My Life as a Dark Lord too. My Life as a Dark Lord takes place right after My Life as a King, so still shortly after the miasma dissipated. This time you play as Mira, the half-clavat, half-demon daughter of the Dark Lord from My Life as a King. Apparently he found himself trapped in a crystal after his defeat, so now Mira is taking up the title of Dark Lord. Mira wages war against the humans with her army of Tonberries, trusted advisor Tonbetty, and many other monsters in her moving castle, likely inspired by the film. And while there's technically less going on, the story's a little more engaging than the last one. Not because of some big twists, more so that it has fan service for fans of Final Fantasy and Crystal Chronicles. My Life as a Dark Lord is broken into chapters. Each of the 5 chapters has a set number of tower defense stages, and the final one has a big boss related to a character from the past games. Chime and Hugh Yerg have a fight in the middle, while King Charles lands a role as the final boss, who, if you have a My Life as a King save file, actually renames him and his town to your most recent save. Then the other 2 bosses are references to the original game. In Chapter 1, Mira plans to defeat Baldat and his striped brigands from Crystal Chronicles 1. As a powerful Selkie thief group, she thinks that'll give her a good start. However, once she finally defeats the thieves, she learns that her opponent was actually Baldat's sister Beldat and her caravan, the stripped brigands. A twist I didn't see coming until a female Selkie ran up the tower. For a little bit there I thought Baldat transitioned between games. And the one boss I haven't mentioned is Princess Fiona. Fiona is the princess of Alphateria. Back in Crystal Chronicles 1, she had a full multi-year side quest. After the death of her Clavat mother, she, as a mixed tribe princess of the Grand Lilty Empire, had a short little identity crisis. She left Alphateria clad in Selkie clothes on a hunt for her purpose. In Crystal Chronicles 1, you had to find her at a few different towns until she finally had a big revelation. As next in line of Alphateria, she has a responsibility to maintain peace between all tribes. Maybe as a mixed tribe ruler, she can bring all of them closer together than before. And then at the end, she rewards you 100,000 gil each. Do not skip this quest. It's insane that I didn't talk about it in part 1. Personally, I like your story a lot, especially with how it molds into My Life as a Dark Lord. Here, Fiona hopes that Mira can do something similar for monsters. As a half-breed, maybe she can bring the monsters and humans to a peaceful understanding. You fight Fiona at the midway point of the game though, so Mira kicks her out to continue her journey. We must wait for the final lesson of the day. Which yeah, that is kinda how it ends. Mira meets King Charles, they become friends, Mira tries to bridge monsters and humans together, and Tonbetty was actually a human in a Tonberry costume. Just like My Life as a King, the actual outline is on the basic side. It's held together by the charm of Crystal Chronicles in general, though here I think it's held better than in My Life as a King, mostly due to that fan service. It even has costumes for Mira based on Final Fantasy IV, Charlotta, and monsters to summon during gameplay based on Final Fantasy IV The After Years, which is cool stuff. It reminded me that The After Years was Square's other WiiWare game, until I forgot about The After Years again. Its idea of the monsters finding their place after the miasma dissipated also pairs nicely with the original game. I mentioned how they have their own structures implying a hierarchy like Demon's Court or Goblin Wall, and Dark Lord shows that off for real. The fall of the miasma shook up their structures just as much as it did for humans. It makes both My Life games a neat little epilogue to the original. See how both sides find a new way to live, and at the end of both, find common ground to strive to the future. A future that we'll get to see how it pans out in the final game. Alright, so now the gameplay for My Life as a Dark Lord. I'm gonna be talking about this even shorter than as a king. If you have played a tower defense game, and I bet most of you all, because suddenly all of my friends are playing Balloon Tower Defense 5 or whatever, then this won't be foreign to you. This is your tower. You must protect the heart of your tower, placed upon the roof. If even one adventurer makes it up there, you lose. To prevent that, you stack floors filled with monsters, traps, or both to defeat adventurers. Up to 5 floors at the start of the game, and once you upgrade your tower, you can have 10 floors. To set the floors down, you use these dark heart crystals, and depending on the strength of the floor, decides the price of it. Every time you begin a stage, you have 1,000 dark heart crystals, and defeating adventurers nets you more. Nothing really new for these types of games. Here, what you need to pay the most attention to is the weapon type of your units and the enemy units. Have you ever played Fire Emblem? Don't worry if you haven't, I've only played like an hour of one, which is enough to know that Dark Lord ripped off their triangle weakness system. Each unit is either a neutral, ranged, magic, or direct attacker. Besides neutral, each resists one and is super effective against another. So your goal is to watch to see which unit comes through and then have the correct counter ready. A simple idea that can get frantic. Keep in mind, your units have a weakness too. So let's say you put down a magic unit to deal with a direct unit. Then, right afterwards, a ranged unit comes by. At this point, you have 2 options. Let your unit take a lot of damage, or put a direct attack unit under the magic unit. If you opened with a cheap, weaker unit, then sacking them isn't a big deal. You'll afford a new one in no time. However, if you started with a big, strong, expensive mantis dude, you may want to work to keep them safe. A viable strategy, especially for units in the middle, is to quickly place down a trap. Only one enemy unit can be in each of the floors at a time, so if a ranged attacker is about to reach the floor with your magic unit, you can stall them with one of the trap rooms that puts them to sleep, opening a chance for someone your magic attacker can deal with. A strategy that's a little easier said than done. More often than not, the enemies of a certain type come in pairs or trios, making the strategy I just said risky in those instances, which is why at levels you don't have memorized, you should start with some mixed setups. Anyways, besides other basic RPG mechanics you expect like levels, status ailments, etc., there's not much more to go into. Do you want a tower defense game with Fire Emblem's triangle weakness system? Then yeah, here's what you want. I know it sounds like I haven't said much about either My Life game, and that's because without going into excruciating detail about every building, floor, or stat, there's not a whole lot to say. The greater experience of both is identical by the 3rd hour, besides getting a little harder. As of today, I can only really recommend this to someone that absolutely loved the original Crystal Chronicles and the DS games that wants to see more of the world, because the series' charm is still here. In both, they rip most models from the Gamecube game, and the humor is similar to Echoes of Time. If you want to see how the humans and monsters came together after the original journey, then these 2 games provide a great epilogue to that story. Pair that with the DS duo that show us the world before the miasma, and we have a nice full picture of the world. The prosperous age of the past, a struggling time in the present, and a period of rebirth and prosperity for everyone in the near future. It's a complete story. Through all that, we can envision a peaceful future. Yeah, we ain't getting that.
王国を危険にさらす者どもめ、動くな。俺はクリスタルベアラーだ。その力が災いなのだ。ここは存在と不在の狭間。